Well, welcome. Thank you for being here today. Appreciate it. You know, some of the good things about this class is that we have plenty of coffee, and we have an abundance of coffee today. So there is a request that you drink your normal amounts today, so we know exactly how much to make or not to make. And so we've been having to throw a lot of coffee away downstairs, and we don't want to waste that. We really don't. So if you're inclined to drink coffee during class, then we have plenty in the back. Feel free to get it. Well, some of the kingships that we're talking about here did not last as long as this class has. And I know you're feeling that, but we are somewhere on the downside, maybe almost early downside, but we're getting there. And if you'll just bear with us. I took note of something that Nathan said today in his sermon, that the way you can tell an active congregation and everything is that when you come to class and you learn something, you want to go and teach it to other people. So I am sure there are thousands of conversations going on out there about the kings and the divided kingdom. I can just see the excitement on your face. We appreciate that kind of enthusiasm from the class and everything. The other challenge is that there are so many electronic things going on up here. In fact, I just forgot one, actually. That for people of my generation, it is really a challenge to know what button to hit next. So if I hit the wrong one, you'll just have to say it's age-related, and we'll all be happy and move on. We always keep coming back and doing a little review, and I just want to put in perspective some things about what the divided kingdom was faced with. Really, it's fundamentally really pretty simple what the divided kingdom was faced with. Human weakness and pride, and the interspersion of other peoples who did not know God and brought idolatry continuously into the Israelite nation. And the Israelites were so weak, they couldn't resist it. I mean, that's basically what it all comes down to. It's pride and maybe some fear mixed in with that pride, fear of being captive to some other nation around them. And that's kind of why I put this slide up there. Remember, the primary nations or kingdoms, if you will, that were a threat to Israel at this time, and we're in the time period today of about 870 BC, and if the good Lord is good to us, we'll make it all the way down to about 735 or 730 or somewhere. So that's the time period that we're in. We're looking at about a 100-year stretch today. But in that time period, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was a great threat to Israel. Now, none of these empires, the Syrian Empire or the Assyrian Empire or the Moabites or any of the other smaller kingdoms and everything, were continuously strong. They went through periods of being extremely strong and aggressive and periods of being extremely weak and not powerful, and in subjugation themselves to other kingdoms that were on the rise. So it's not unlike what we see going on in the world today. A lot of times there's power for a period of time. That power goes away. Things happen in a vacuum of a lack of power, and then that original power comes back. It's all cyclical. All of life is cyclical, isn't it? Even some of the ties that Tommy wears will come back one day. You know, we have great hope for that. But I wanted to just note, in this time period that we're in today, that the Neo-Assyrian Empire was at a point where it's building its might, it's coming back, it's really forming, and it's ultimate strength during this time period that we're in. It really had a period of expansion during the same time period under Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon II, and these are referred to in the scriptures. So we know that there's a connection between these peripheral empires and the nation of Israel. We'll come back talk about what they did to Egypt later on. And now, it's always a challenge because the map I'm looking at is not the map you see with clarity. But I just wanted to show this map of this. All of this history that we're talking about happened in a really, really small area of the world. I keep emphasizing that. This is almost like Davidson and Williamson County and a couple of other counties put together. We're not talking about great geographic areas. This is where we suspect that Eden was. This is the land of Ur, opening onto the sea here. The Assyrian strength was up here around Nineveh, but it had influence all the way back down here and all the way around here. And another group that we will talk about this morning is the Syrian Empire, not the Assyria Empire, but the Syrian Empire, which is also known as Aram, and its capital city is Damascus. So there's a kingdom that is developing and has been in this area here, and the Assyrian nation is rising above it, both geographically and in power and influence. I'd just like to know where we are in the world that we're talking about. The Aram or Damascus kingdom has a long history, as you can see. When we start getting down to the 800s BC, we see that Ben-Hadad, again, a name familiar from the scriptures, is very active and very strong. He and his son, Ben-Hadad II, reigns during this time that we're talking about. And then there is a usurpation, if you will, if there is such a word, of power among those individuals. Hazael, Hazel, that we will see a lot of today, assassinates Ben-Hadad II and becomes the power. And so Israel is continually faced with not just these two strong kingdoms above, all of whom live in idolatry, who worship different kinds of gods and have different kinds of temples made to God, other gods. They also have to deal with the smaller kingdoms on the eastern bank of the Dead Sea, where the 2.5 tribes were originally given land mass. And they also have to deal with tribes below Judah and then have to deal with Egypt. So they, in a sense, just like today, are completely surrounded by people who do not know Jehovah and who do not respect their religious practices and religious ways. We'll come back to this slide later on. So we're going to pick up today with Jehoshaphat, 872 to 848. Jehoshaphat was the fourth king of Judah, and he was the son of Asa that we've talked about before. He came to the throne at the age of 35, and he was able to rule Judah for 25 years. He was a contemporary of Ahab, really, and we all know the history of Ahab. We've talked about that before. And both of his sons, Uzziah and Jehoram, or Joram, as it's sometimes written. It's interesting to note that Jehoshaphat in Judah became extremely powerful and extremely rich. He is described as the king that's most like David because of the restorations that he attempted to put in place to bring people back to Jehovah. He also had a military mind in addition to his theological mind, and he rebuilt many cities and fortified them in Judah and Benjamin. And during his reign, there was a great period of peace. Things were kind of settled for once, and they enjoyed this prosperity. So through his religious, his belief in God and bringing them back to God, and the power that he built in fortifying their cities, many countries brought him tribute, and he amassed a great amount of wealth. He became extremely rich. He had the confidence of the people, so he had a lot of influence. He also gave in the third year of his reign, he gave a strong commission to individuals in certain provinces within Judah, kind of like we would call governors today, to make decisions. And his message to them was that they were to make judgments according to God's law and not man's desires or wishes, and that was a strong restoration point. So we see Jehoshaphat with a lot of bounty, a lot of money, a lot of wealth. Even the Philistines paid tribute to him. I didn't mention the Philistines, but the Phoenicians and the Philistines were on the Mediterranean coast on the west side of Israel, and so they contributed to the circle of enemies that Israel had. Jehoshaphat was doing really well, bringing peace, prosperity to the people, until he formed an alliance with Ahab against the king of Syria. Syria being Aram, capital city being Damascus, directly north and closest to the border of Israel. And so Ahab was concerned about the power that Syria was gaining and the potential for them to invade Israel. And so he asked Jehoshaphat to form an alliance with him and to go to battle with him. That was a mistake. We'll come across this name several different times, the Battle of Ramoth Gilead, but it turned out really to be a disaster for both kings, for Ahab and for Jehoshaphat. But in that battle, we'll go more into detail about it later, but basically Jehoshaphat made it out of the battle, and he made it back to Jerusalem. And as king, he continued to address after that loss and defeat even more forcefully the fact that the nation needed to get back to God. So he's strengthening their religious fervor while he's strengthening their military mights. The Moabites and the Ammonites, which are basically down in the southeastern part of the circle surrounding Israel, saw the defeat, though, of these two kings as an opportunity to throw off the enslavement that they were suffering and had suffered really from really almost the time of David. And they saw this as an opportunity to get out from under the rule of Israel and Judah, and they took advantage of that. And they were partially successful, not completely successful, but they were successful. And so they began to exercise their own power and their own strength and their own ability to give to themselves rather than giving to Israel or to Judah. Jehoshaphat also allied with Uzziah to renew a maritime route of enterprises of Solomon. Again, he had the wealth and the knowledge to go over to Ur and that far down and get into that area and all the way over to almost to Egypt. He had access to water. And so they together thought they could reform the Navy, if you will, the ships that Solomon had that were destroyed. And he was going to open up maritime commerce and make the combined nation of Israel and Judah more wealthy. But in 848, when they were about to undertake this, the fleet ran into some very severe weather, and they wrecked at Zion Geber and were completely wiped out. And so he's made two decisions here. One, both of them with Ahab and Uzziah, the successor to Ahab, in that he went to war and lost. He tried commercial economic venture and lost. And so some of his influence, some of his opportunity to lead the people back to God have now been minimized. So Jehoshaphat dies in 848, and he is succeeded by his unworthy son, Jehoram, who reigned from 848 to 841, really. He's the fifth king of Judah. And sometimes when you're looking at the kingships of these individuals, you have to understand that the length doesn't always match up. There were overlapping periods of co-regency. The father and the son reigned together. And so it's a little hard sometimes to say this guy was king from this period to this period or this date to this date because of that. And some of those overlapping times were significant amounts of time, 15, 20 years that they overlap. But usually it was a year or two that occurred. Now, Jehoram married a daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. Ahab and Jezebel will just not go away. The influence of their family goes through this whole history at this particular time everywhere, even though God has declared that that family lineage will be wiped from the face of the earth. But they're still very active at this period. He married Athaliah, who was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And her primary characteristic was she was just like her mother. Now, in today's world, that would be a compliment, wouldn't it? We would want our children to be like their mothers, grow up to be the kind of women spiritually that their mothers were. Well, she was the kind of a woman that her mother was in every way, including treacherous and evil and against Jehovah. So we see that Jehoram did not make a wise decision in that. Another bad thing that Jehoram did that weakened the success that Jehoshaphat had built was that after Jehoshaphat died, he killed his brothers. He killed his brothers. And we really think that this is the first example of an internecine clinging to the throne of power. First time that one man wiped out an entire family just to hold on to the kingship and the power. We know that in our more recent history that has happened much more frequently, especially as we look at the European kings and all of those succession matters, that we see more treachery or the same kind of treachery in more recent times that we saw way before Christ ever came to this earth. But he had then, well, with all of his brothers gone, he had an undisputed succession to the kingship. Well, this wasn't looked upon with favor by God. It wasn't looked upon with favor by anyone. And Obadiah is the primary prophet that is active during this particular time period. The first, I guess really the third bad decision that Jehoram made was to go to war with Edom, or really Edom provoked the war. They revolted just like the other countries had done because of the perceived weaknesses that they saw. And so Jehoram lost influence and power over Edom. And this began a really steady decline, if you will, that leads to more war, basically. The prediction that God made to Jehoram was that because of the evil that he was pursuing, taking away the kingdoms from Jehovah, was that he would die of an incurable disease, a miserable disease. And we see this affliction come upon him during this time that he's at war. And he actually eventually died, we believe, historians believe that he eventually died from a disease of the bowels. And we don't need to comment on that any further. We all know the distress that can cause and the pain and the quality of life. He died. And his death was described as he died and departed without being regretted. That tells you something in a short period of time how the nations, how the people of the nations adored Jehoshaphat, but in his successor, very quickly that adoration of the kingship went away, and Jehoram died a miserable death. But before he died, he was in continual battles. We've talked about a couple of them already, but the Philistines and the Arabians, this is a new coalition, if you will. The Philistines on the western border, it's really the eastern border of the Mediterranean Sea, the western border of Israel. The Philistines and the Arabians were the southern part down where Edom and Moab was, way down south in the desert area. They formed a coalition against Jehoram, and they were successful in the revolt. They raided the palace. They carried off all the bounty that they could carry away, including his entire family, with the exception of his son Uzziah. And so you can see where we go next with that. I mentioned that he died, that Jehoram died. He was not buried with the other kings because of his evil nature, and that's really kind of a sad mark on the kingship. He was not honored. Uzziah succeeded him. He was 22 years old. He ruled 1 year. It's kind of the length of time that it feels like you're going through this morning, you know. He didn't have time to do very much. He was really, he was the son of Athaliah, which it was the daughter of Jezebel, and he adopted all of the evil ways of both of them. And so he was not a very good king. He had no good influence for the Lord. And the Lord at this time had decided that both in Judah with Uzziah and in Israel with their king, that he was going to bring both of those to an end and make things right. And as it turns out, basically both of the kings in Israel and in Judah suffered deaths close to each other, and their power and influence was lessened. We also need to note that at this particular time, Elisha is active in prophecy. He has followed Elijah. Elijah was a prophet in Israel primarily before or during the time of Jehoshaphat, and then he was succeeded, of course, as we know, by Elisha. Elisha goes to Damascus. Now, why would Elisha go to Damascus? Well, there's really not a good reason. Damascus is the capital of the Syrian Empire, Aram, and the mortal enemy of Israel and Judah, ultimately. Why would he go there to crown a future king? Well, it really is pretty simple again. You know, when we get down to the root causes of most things, they're really pretty simple. Things are really pretty simple. God was using the Syrian Empire, Damascus, to teach Israel and Judah a lesson. And that's not uncommon. God often, during these times, would use a kingdom or a person, an individual, much more evil than the person he's punishing or the country he's punishing, to show them the contrast between the two. And he used them as an instrument, but almost, well, in every case that I'm aware of, he also was going to even the score with those countries or that individual down the road. None of them survived in a long way or over a long period of time. So God used them for the moment to execute his authority and his punishment of the people, of his chosen people, and then he would deal with that country or that individual later on. Elisha goes to Damascus to designate Hazael as a future king of Syria. That's kind of interesting because there was a conversation on the way there. Hazael was a close confidant of Ben-Hadad, the king of the Syrian Empire. He was a confidant. He was close to the king. And the king actually had sent him to inquire of Elisha whether he was going to die from an illness that he was suffering. And there's a long conversation there that we don't want to get into. The bottom line is that Elisha tells Hazael that he's going to be the new king. Hazael goes back and tells Ben-Hadad that he's going to recover, and then the next day he suffocates Ben-Hadad with a cloth dipped in water. Just goes to show you, be careful of your friends first and other people next. But we see this kind of treachery. The treachery that we see maybe in today's world has been around for a long, long time. And so Hazael becomes the king of Aram, and the two kings that we've talked about, Uzziah, are now out of the way. There are two different accounts, really, of how Uzziah died. One is in Chronicles. That account says that he fled to Samaria, and Jehoram, when Jehoram was killed, and he was found there and brought to Jehu, who, when we look at the other side of this divided kingdom, we'll see who Jehu is. And Jehu put him to death. Jehu is the one that after the battle at Ramoth-Gilead actually caused the death of Jezebel, sent soldiers there, and on her being able to see them, she was thrown from the balcony by two of her closest advisors, her friends, and she was done away with there by the dogs. So all this is happening almost simultaneously. We have all these things going on. But according to Chronicles, Uzziah fled to Samaria when Jehoram was killed in this battle. He was found hidden there. He was brought to Jehu, who put him to death. But Jehu granted him the recognition that a king deserved, and he was buried in the king's tombs. He did it really because he had a lot of respect for Jehoshaphat, not because of what he had done. The king's narrative says basically the same thing, but that after Jehoram was mortally wounded and he went up to die in another city, that Uzziah came down and they were pursuing him. The thing that is interesting is that Uzziah had dressed himself as a royal, so it was easy to spot him in the battle. It was easy to pursue him. Jehoram had dressed as a regular soldier, and it thought it snuck out, but an arrow accidentally hit him between his armor, and he died there. And that's out of the alliance that we talked about earlier. So Uzziah was mortally, according to Kings, he was mortally wounded at the pass of Gur, about 13 miles north of Samaria, and he died after making it all the way to Megiddo, which is northwest of this area that we are talking about. Bottom line is, both of them were dead, and God had evened the score, if we can say it that way. Athaliah, as you might suspect, was not necessarily the next person in line. She actually did, though, take power for about 6 years after her after the death, and her first act again was to slay all the royal seed of Judah except Joash, and Joash was spared because he was a newborn son to the king, and his aunt Jehoshaphat hid him away and protected him. So we have the lineage of David protected through him, as God had predicted the Messiah would come through the lineage of David, and it did because Joash was protected from his mother as she killed all the royal seed. And then when he was 7 years old, the advisors had had enough of her evil ways, and so they anointed Joash as king at 7 years old over Judah, a very expansive area of geography, a very rich area, an area that had a large army that a 7-year-old needed to take charge of. I don't think we can imagine that. And we'd all be a little bit leery if that happened today, wouldn't it? Well, anyway, Athaliah found out about this secret anointing that was occurring in the temple, and she went down and rent her clothes and was crying, "Treason, treason, you can't do this, this is not right." And so she was removed by the captains of the temple and actually executed outside the palace, outside the horse gate, if you will, of the royal palace. And so her influence and her reign came to an abrupt end. Joash was then named the king, or crowned the king, if you will, of Judah. He was really a pretty decent king. He repaired the temple, which had fallen into some disarray because what? Evil was being pushed through the kingdom. They had done away, for all practical matters of daily living, with the law, and they weren't going to the temple. They weren't paying taxes. The good thing for Joash was that there was a individual, a prophet, if you will, around that had great influence over him, Jehoiada. And fortunately, Jehoiada lived 130 years, so that during Joash's lifetime, he was able to exert an awful lot of influence over this young king. And that's a good thing. Experienced people leading inexperienced people, if you will, to do good things. But he died, and then what happens? Without a good influence in his life, Jehoash forgot the kindness that he was shown, the kindness that had been given to him by this man, and he turned against Jehovah. He listened to individuals his own age, if you will, his advisors, his young advisors, and they led him in the wrong ways, if you will. For 23 years of his reign, he lived in great piety and enjoyed prosperity, but he came to a most unhappy end when actually for two reasons. Aram invaded, and that was not a pleasant battle that he won. He ransacked Jerusalem, took all the bounty, took all the people, and then shortly thereafter, there was another invasion. And so we find at the end of Joash's reign that he was a miserable person. And we really don't know whether he died from a wound from one of these battles or whether he died from vexation, which is another word for depression. And so we know that this is an unhappy time for him, and eventually he would become the victim of two of his servants, and they would kill him. And he was not buried in the tomb of the kings. He was not given the honor. And it's kind of worth noting here that Joash, though a king in name, was not buried in the tomb of the kings, but Jehoiada, the priest, though not a king in name, was buried in the tombs of the kings. So there is some justice in the world. There is some leveling, if you will. And I think we're going to stop there. And I know, Tommy, this is going to rearrange our outline, but we'll be okay with that. Any comments or questions? I know we're going through a lot of this. Again, we want you to see that Israel was in the shape that the Bible describes it in Chronicles and Kings and other parts of the Old Testament because of the influence of the evil people around them and because of the military power. And just think how many times both nations were ransacked by these foreign armies, and gold and silver in the temple bowls and the temple pieces were taken out of the country. That gives you some measure of the immense wealth that was in this very small geographic area at this time. And that's what amazes me about this. And hopefully we'll have a better understanding, not an empathy necessarily, but a better understanding of why God dealt with Israel and with Judah the way that he did. We're going to stop there. Thank you for your attendance. I really do appreciate it.